Hello everyone, welcome to my experience and impressions of Torchlight. This is a new format of videos I'll try to do where I bring you a game in a more condensed format. Planned are a few videos per game, depending on how many ideas I have for videos. One about experience and impressions for sure, maybe a couple for story and other things, as I said, depending on how many ideas I have for the videos. My reasoning for doing this new series is to have some games I can play and record for the channel whenever I feel like it, or cannot talk over the gameplay directly, like say late at night when the neighbors are not happy when I do so. Also, the chance to get into video editing and scripting a bit more and learning new stuff in general, like Audacity that I'm now using for this recording. The plan is to still have about one regular Let's Play and stream series going on at all times on the channel, or let's say I should start being more consistent with those, but the plan is to have one of each going at all times. Let's switch to Torchlight now that we have this introduction out of the way. First thing first, my thoughts. Overall, Torchlight for me was a mixed bag. I thought I would like it better than I did from my experience playing it in the past, but it just didn't grab me the way I thought it would. There probably just has been too much going on in the action RPG genre over the last years, but yeah. In the second part of playing, I installed some mods and the fun did improve significantly by just messing around with things and trying to bring the mechanics to the limits. Having said that, let's start with the overview of the game. So, Torchlight is an action RPG or hack and slash, however you want to define that genre. Dungeon crawler also sometimes is used. It has been released in 2009, developed by Runic Games. And interesting facts I could find on the Wikipedia page. It had original Diablo developers on the team, and I think that shows, as we will later on see. My playtime, I was playing this game about 10 to 15 hours in total, with about 5 of those being without mods and about 10 with mods, I'd say. And now, for the next section, let's look at the basic gameplay loops, or loop, depending on the game. So in Torchlight, generally you start in town, you go down, well it's basically a layered world where you start in town, which is on the top, and go down, 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 down. And each of these levels that you go down is randomized, and you just slay your way through to get to the next level. Occasionally there will be elites on the maps, and occasionally you also go back to town to complete quests. And some of the levels are boss levels where you fight the boss, and usually that's followed up by a shift in biome or area, overall theme of the environment. Now let's look at the classes. Now I have to say I didn't dive too much into the classes and just tried the ranged class first, and that one didn't suit me too much. And then I tried the Magey class, which I also did not find overly interesting in terms of skills. Then finally, for the modded playthrough, I just took a summoner. Well, it's also the mage character, but not with the mage skills, with the summoning skills, and I stuck with that. So that's the overview of what I played, and now let's take a look at the classes that are generally available. The one I didn't play, the Destroyer, is, as far as I can tell, melee-oriented character. It covers the melee and barbarian archetypes, and those usually are not my first choices. I tend to try them out once I was satisfied with the other classes, but in this instance with Torchlight I didn't have enough fun to also get around to play the Destroyer. Then up second we have the Vanquisher, which is the archer slash rogue slash ninja archetype, and well, it has a ranged tree with couple abilities for the ranged playstyle. It has a melee oriented tree where you get into the backstabbing stuff, and a trap tree like the ninja in Diablo 2 for example, where you can lay out traps that will automatically fire at enemies near enough. You also have the third class, the Alchemist. So the Alchemist is the typical mage and summoner character. It has also 3 trees as all the others. The first tree on the Alchemist focuses on spells, second tree on more pet and summoning oriented stuff, and then the last spell tree has kind of general buffs and or weapon damage buffs. I think you could do a weapon oriented build with that, magic weapons especially like staffs and wands, but I only used a few of the skills on that tree. Now I would like to talk about the positive points that just by playing I wrote down a couple things that I thought were positive, followed by the negatives. I don't have a scheme currently for, a rigorous scheme where I say, I have to take a look at graphics, I have to take a look at music, I have to look at this and that. I don't do that currently. What I do is just I play the game, and whenever I have a moment where I think, oh, that's nice, I write that down. And if I have a moment where I say, that's not that great, I also write that down. So it's more like a list of things that stood out to me, whether them being positive or negative. So, the positives. First positive point is the overall setting and theme. It's not a point that was overly positive, but it was quite okay. There are a lot of games where I think the general theme is not my cup of tea, like zombie games. I usually don't like zombie games too much. Sadly, there are zombies in all games nowadays, but yeah, if they are just based on zombies, it's usually not my thing. There can be exceptions to that, but it's a point that's already driving me away from the game in general. So it has to have a lot of positives to offset that. But yeah, in Torchlight, the overall theme and setting, it didn't grab me overly like, let's say, an ancient Greek setting or something, but it also didn't push me away, so it was serviceable. The pet you get is a nice little touch. It can carry loot, go to town and sell loot. It can also fight alongside you and even use some spells, which we'll cover later. The pet can also be fed to transform it into various monsters that have different characteristics. I didn't bother with the feeding mechanic too much because it's tied to fishing, which we'll also cover later, and I didn't dabble in fishing too much. So that's in and of itself a very neat thing to have a pet that's helping you. However, in later levels I thought the usefulness of the pet became less and less, and that deteriorated to a point where it felt more like a cell bot that I loaded up on loot and told to go back to town and sell the stuff, than an actual companion that is fighting alongside you as a peer. Well, I think having them alongside you as a peer always is kind of dangerous in video games, since you don't want to make them too powerful. But in later levels I thought, like, whenever it was fighting, it was running away a lot of the time. Perhaps I could have given it the right amulets and the rings, so it would be more useful, but I didn't find any that made a real difference. Overall, the concept of having a companion fight alongside the hero is great for me. That may also be a bias of myself, where I tend to really like summoning characters in action RPGs in particular. Next good point would be the shared chest. Whilst this is a pretty basic feature by now, back then I think the shared chest was kind of newish feature. At least Diablo 2 in the vanilla version didn't have one. Not sure if it has by now been patched in. You can have a shared chest for sure in Diablo 2 with the, what's it called, Pluggy mod, and that's a very nice addition. So it's always nice to be able to exchange items that you find that would be great for different characters, to trade over to those different characters than to just have to throw them away because, well, the character you currently play cannot use them. Now the graphics in general. Whilst the graphics are not top-notch by this point, the art style in general has aged very well. It's always these cartoonish looking games, they tend to age very well. Each area or biome that is traversed has a distinct feel to it, and, well, to me it all looks pretty neat. The new areas are swapped out regularly enough to not feel like you're always fighting in the same environment. I'd say it's about every 4 to 5 levels you get a new biome. And the whole thing is very colorful. And I am personally a person who likes these vibrant, glowing, colorful worlds more than the bleak ones generally. Now for the spells, as mentioned on the pet section. Those spells are kind of a further character customization that you can do that goes beyond the usual gear and skills and attributes that can be distributed. You find spells on scrolls, can also buy them sometimes, and you can slot up to 4 of those on the character and up to 2 on the pet. So these can range from casting a fireball to summoning zombies, summoning skeletons, healing all party members, healing yourself, all the way to an identification spell or town portal spell, which would make the carrying of identification scrolls and town portal scrolls obsolete in the inventory. So I did stick in my playthrough with identification, healing, summoning stuff, because I played the summoner. And yeah, it's kind of neat. You could also go down the route of using attack spells or buffing spells. Perhaps that would even be more useful. I didn't min-max things and didn't look up which thing has more stats than the other. It's a neat touch to further customize a character. The next positive point would be the music and sounds. Now here is the point where I was most reminded of the fact that initial Diablo 2 developers were on the game. The town theme especially was reminding me a lot of the Tristram theme of Diablo 2, and I think the music in general is very, well, it reminds me a lot of Diablo 2. Not only the music, but also the sound effects. It's all very Diablo 2-y. And that does not mean it's a bad thing, because the Diablo sound and music, they are very good in my opinion. And next up we have the enchanting mechanic. Enchanting gives a possibility to upgrade gear even further with random stats. How it works is basically you say, I want to upgrade this item, you have to pay some gold, and you have a probability for it to fail and for the item to be disenchanted fully. And the gold cost and chance to fail rise with each enchantment. So that's all well and good, but I found that it's a bit prohibitive to try things, because you don't want to enchant or you don't want to lose your very good items. So you tend to not enchant the very good items further, and therefore you end up not using that system a lot. And also another point is it's random, so you could get something awesome for your build, but most of the time you just get something where you think, well, okay, I didn't really need that, did I? Now the last point I wrote down would be the maps and portal goblins. From time to time, when you are in a map or in the usual levels, let's say, you will encounter goblins that will drop a portal to a mini dungeon. That's usually a smaller map with a different theme, and you have a couple mini bosses there and a bit of loot. It's kind of cool because it shakes up the regular play by putting you in a visually different biome. And yeah, as I said, you get some loot, some named monsters, and it's just overall a nice shake-up. And you also get back to the point where you started when you are finished with that. You can also trigger a mini dungeon spawn by using map scrolls, and the map scrolls can be bought in town. So that's basically when you don't know what to do, you can always get a map scroll. Probably also if you need to gear up a bit, then you can also use map scrolls. Now for the negative points. There are a couple. Let's see. Let's start with the story. The story is extremely basic. Now that's a very minor negative, because story is not a big issue for an action RPG in general. But not sure if the story here in Torchlight can actually be called a story as such. It's basically the story of there are bad things, kill bad things, make world better. Perhaps I'll go into the story a bit later in the video, but it's so basic I don't think it warrants an additional video just about the story. Another negative that I found was that the key rebinds are not available. You just have to work with the keys the game has bound for you, and you can't rebind them. I didn't rate that as a strong negative point neither, it's just I noticed that I wanted to rebind one or two keys, but I got used to the scheme that they provided me, so that's okay. Now a bigger point that I did not like was the enemy pop-in. Whenever I walked around on the map, enemies would appear out of nowhere, like spawn in, and it was already visible. I'm not sure if that's because I played on a high resolution monitor, so my field of view was bigger than it was intended, or bigger than the spawn in distance of enemies, but that's a very noticeable flaw, because especially when I'm playing with the mods and running around a bit faster. Could be that I run into enemies that I didn't even see because they just spawned in. It's by no means game breaking once you get used to it, but it's very irritating, at least to me. The next point I noted was that without mods, the game is very slow paced. At least it feels so to me. Especially in the beginning, you run around like, well, a snail. And for me it didn't get better. I don't know if it's supposed to be bound to gear, that you find gear at some point that makes you run faster and shoot faster and stuff, but I didn't find such gear. So for me it was very slow-paced experience, and that's not what I'm looking for in an action RPG. And especially if the high-end gear would lessen this issue, I wouldn't know, because my fun was killed long before I could get to the high-end gear. So it would be unlikely that I would see the high-end gear, because I stopped playing long before I find this high-end gear. Another point I always fought with was the inventory space, which was very limited. Although you do get the pet and you can put items on the pet and sell stuff in town, you still just have space for about, I didn't count, but perhaps 30 items, and let's say about 8 of those are taken by potions and scrolls and stuff. So you're down to, let's say, 20-ish slots that you can realistically use. And that means that a lot of times you are just looking at items. Well, you're in the flow, killing stuff, then you get drops. You pick them up. But at some point you are overburdened. You will have to stop the flow. You will have to stop the already slow-paced flow to do slow-paced work, which is inventory management. And that was very off-putting for me. Although the pet can sell things in town, that's a good thing. And you don't have to pick up everything. But even if I didn't pick up the white items that have no magic stats on them, I still ended up in that situation where I had to regularly clear out inventory. Now, as for why I didn't use the pet feeding mechanic too much, aka fishing. Fishing, while in general I don't mind fishing all that much, it's just another thing like the inventory management that interrupted the slow pacing of the game it interrupted the already slow pacing of the game. If the game was very fast paced, then perhaps from time to time I would feel like it was a nice touch to slow down a bit, do a bit of fishing. The fishing base gameplay is also pretty basic. It's just you go to a fishing hole, you press the button when you hear a sound or something, and that's that. You get the fish, hopefully, out of it. Now the fish per se, they have nice benefits. They can transform the pet. There are also potion-like fish that you can eat for bonus, like more electric damage or more fire damage, stuff like that. So in and of itself, the benefits for fishing would be quite nice, but I never found joy in doing the fishing, because, as I said, perhaps if the game was very fast paced, I would think like, oh cool, now a little break, 1 or 2 minutes of fishing. But no, it was already pretty slow paced, and I didn't think like, oh, I need to slow down a bit and do some fishing. Also, because the inventory space is very limited, you don't have space to carry a lot of buffing fish with you anyways. Now for one of the biggest points, itemization. How should I put that? Itemization in Torchlight to me felt very boring. I was never excited for any loot, and it's, well, usually in other games you get boring loot early on, but it picks up as you go. For example, The Division is an example that I have in mind, where early on, when the early part sadly reaches into a lot of the game, early on you get very boring loot and you get to the point where you ask yourself, well, is that all the game gives me? But in The Division, late game loot is pretty neat. It really makes a difference. And here I felt like it was always just some... you get plus X to stat Y and you get set amount of resistance, something like that. It's never been changing the way I play, if that makes sense. So as a result, I was never excited with the gear drops, and even unique items were not a thrill to find. There were some uniques, well, I did get uniques relatively often, but the unique items were also just these like plus X to stat Y, and it felt like they were also randomized, or at least the set items, and that led to it being mostly a case of, well, okay, nice, it's decent, it gives me a bit of stats, but it's not something I'm excited for. And tying into that, I did not find a way to loot to farm for better loot. It all felt very random. And that's coming down to, well, yes, named enemies drop good loot, but it's always random. In Diablo 2, for instance, you could at least specifically farm certain bosses for certain loot, which meant you did get some progress towards what you wanted. Also, the rune words that they put in Diablo 2, I know there were a couple bosses that you could farm for runes, higher end runes, and there were a couple rune words that were very neat and granted you a good upgrade that would carry you to the bosses that dropped even better loot. So there you have a clear path of where you can farm stuff and where not. But then again, I have to admit I didn't look into that point too much, because the game just didn't grab me enough to look up stuff like this. So all in all, my character probably was very poorly geared even at the end of the game. Now, the next point is pathfinding of AI, especially pets. As a non-summoner character, this may not be a big issue, but as a summoner, I never got the pets to, or well, never. At least it felt like I never got the pets to attack what I wanted them to attack. And to regroup them, I had to run away a large distance from the enemies, and even that didn't even work all the time. So the pathfinding for me was an issue, but on a non-summoner character it's probably not a big issue. Now, another thing that was just clunky is the skills not hitting enemies sometimes. Now that's a very big issue for all the characters, because if you think you hit the enemy but you don't, that's just bad. And I found like in maps with stairs and the like, that would often happen. You click on an enemy and the character does actually shoot, but it just doesn't hit. Then you have to reposition and try again. Now, it didn't break the game as in you can't progress, but it's another clunky thing that didn't help the flow, because you could just attack and, oh, I don't hit, I have to reposition and try again. That's just doesn't feel good. And the last negative point that I want to bring up is the skills of the characters. I personally didn't find the skill that wowed me. It's just none of the skills clicked with me. They're decent, they do what they say they do, but it's not something that I would say like, I click that button, everything dies, I'm happy. There was no such a thing. Well, perhaps there was a thing that I press that button, everything dies, but I was not happy. It was just, there was no feel to it where I had to say, wow, that was cool. And not sure if that's because it's an older game and game design has evolved a lot since then. In Diablo 3, for example, there are, especially with couple set items, there are a couple combos that you pull off the combo and then you think, wow, that was amazing. Like 7-sided strike monk build, where you just apply the palm and 7-sided strike goes off and everything is dead. That feels amazing. And here I didn't have that. Perhaps, as I said, it's because it's an older game. Perhaps it was, well, yeah, in general. I mean, in Diablo 2 I had the summoner and I thought that was amazing. I felt really powerful with all the skeletons, the tons and tons of skeletons and mages that all swarmed around me. But here I don't know, there was just not this feeling of being an amazing hero. Now for the biggest strong point though, the modding, the ability to mod the game. So far my points sounded very negative, if I have to be honest, and that is true. I was about to just say, well, I'm stopping it, I'm not playing on, but then I said, well, you know, might as well install a couple mods, and that was a good decision, because after I installed mods, a few of the more major issues were resolved, like the pacing issues. I could just install a mod where I had more running speed and the pacing issues were gone. Gearing issues, well, I could put in a mod that will remove the enchantment or the disenchantment chance, so I would never wreck an item, and that solved the problem with that. I did use to enchant very much after that, although it does lead to overpowered items. But then again, having some fun for some amount of time is still better than having no fun for a prolonged amount of time. And yes, it may be cheating, but it's a single player game, and cheating in a single player game doesn't hurt anyone except for yourself and your own enjoyment of the thing. So in single player games I'm very much okay with cheating as long as it gives you some fun, and sometimes it's just fun to just mess around with the game, see how the systems react if you overdo it with certain parameters, let's say. And yes, in this instance, just over-tuning certain things at least allowed me to finish the game, whereas otherwise I would not have finished the game. Also, there's a lot of mods out there. You can put in new classes, You can tweak the classes, there's mods for... Well, what did I put in? I put in the enchantment mod, running speed, that you have vendors in the town, just general things like that, more vendors in town. And yes, there are many more mods that you can use. So this is where Torchlight, to me, shines the most. You can customize your experience a lot through the use of mods, whereas other games nowadays, let's take the two big examples that I have in mind, Diablo 3 and Path of Exile. You cannot mod those, so you just get the experience that developers intend for you. Well, yes, the base experience of these games is very much more enjoyable to me than Torchlight was, but in Torchlight at least I can customize that experience and mess around with the systems. So in conclusion, whilst the base game to me felt very slow and the loot didn't do it for me and the classes were okay, I could still have a couple hours of fun with this game once I installed the mods especially. However, it will not become a go-to action RPG for me, and I'm probably not taking a look at it again in the future. But then again, 10 to 15 hours of fun, well, let's say 10 hours of fun, 5 hours of not so much fun. That's a good value for the price I paid, which is not that much in a Steam sale. And remember, those points are based on my experience, and you may have a totally different opinion of Torchlight and totally different experience with Torchlight. If you do or did, let me know in the comment section below, and please also give me your reasoning why you liked the game better. Perhaps I did something wrong. Also, as a general remark for this impressions and experience format, if I should do different points, if I should do a more rigid structuring, if I should have points that I always bring up regardless of whether I noticed it while playing or not, let me know as well if I should do improvements there, like as I said, having fixed points that I always address, or just in general if you have ideas that I could try out. With that said, thank you all very much for watching, and see you soon on another video. Now, as a nice little bonus, I think I attached the story of Torchlight here at the end. So I call it spoiler alert, although it's not that much of a spoiler, honestly. It's not that much of a story that you need to be wary of spoilers, I think. But the basic thing is this: you arrive in this Torchlight town, it's a mining town, and everyone is crazy for that ember stuff that they mine there. And you get there and people are fighting, so you help them fight. They go down to the mines, you go help them fight, then someone gets corrupted, you have to fight them, then you learn, oh well, I myself am corrupted, so we need to find a cure. Also, this dude they were searching was kind of evil and corrupted that first boss. And you just fight your way down until you find the cure, and then you have the big plot twist, in quotes, in heavy air quotes, where they abduct the character that helped you get a cure for the corruption. So you go down, fight a couple more enemies, rescue that person, go down, fight a couple more enemies, defeat some bosses, and apparently you solve the corruption. Or maybe not. Perhaps you are now even more corrupted. Well, that's a bit of the open end, but that's the story in general, and I think it's very basic. But as I said, it doesn't need to be much more for an action RPG. So, I hope you enjoyed. See you next time.